Probably seen lots of images on your screen lately regarding this Hamas Israel war that's going on right now in the Middle East. And of late, and I mean like within the last hours today, there's been lots of images of Israeli tanks, artillery pieces, a lot of massing of Israeli military power. And everyone seems to be looking for the next phase of this war, which everybody believes is going to be a ground incursion into the Gaza Strip and into Gaza City in particular. And we've seen lots of images so far of airstrikes that have been going on there to prepare the battlefield and just devastating whole parts of that city. But that is nothing comparison to what's coming with this ground offensive. But there's parts that I have not seen on any network anyone describe what's coming and how hard this really is going to be. And I don't think there's a good appreciation for this, because there's this thought that, man, if you have the Merkava tanks, some of these self-propelled howitzers, armored vehicles, none of which Hamas has. So it seems like it's going to be a really unfair fight. But this fight is much, much more difficult than you can imagine. And let me just tell you a little bit about what you might can expect here, and what hopefully the IDF and Israeli Defense Forces, what they're looking at and preparing for, and hopefully the political leadership in Israel is aware of what they're potentially going to send their troops in for, because the last thing you want to do in the military is rush to failure. Now, as you've heard, there's been 360,000 Israeli reserve forces called up to this. And of course, we've seen the images of the tanks I mentioned. But what you got to understand is this is an extremely complex, sophisticated operation that's going to be necessary, where everybody has to work together: artillery, armor, the infantry, intelligence services, engineering support, and overhead imagery, and the Air Force, and all of those things together, they have to be tightly coordinated. For example, you can't have air power going in and potentially hitting your own troops on the front line. So you've got to be very clear about where you're going, where you're not going, because the air power and artillery would want to hit the flanks potentially of an area they're going to protect against enemy incursions into the flanks. But this is so hard to do on the fly like this, because there's been no preparation for this. These kind of operations normally take months to plan. And certainly the Hamas did. They spent months getting the resources. They rehearsed the operations. They had really good intelligence on how the Israeli Defense Forces operate, and they exploited all that. So that's why their operation was so successful at the beginning. For Israel to have success going in here, they also have to have those same kinds of things. They've got to have time. They've got to have a good plan. It's got to be based on solid intelligence about where the enemy is. And it's got to be rehearsed. You have to prepare for these kinds of operations, because it's all it takes is for one thing to go wrong, and suddenly you're going to get hit in all these different directions you're not prepared for. We need to be sober-minded on this. This is not going to be a cakewalk. This is not going to be easy. It's going to be a high casualty and a high risk operation, I'm afraid. And just let me explain a little bit why. A lot of this we saw was in the most recent, urban fight that the world has been paying attention to, was in Bakhmut in the Russia-Ukraine war. And that was a relatively small urban area. It was only about 70,000 people lived in it before the war, and it still took 9 months to take. And the reason why it took so long is because while Russia was moving their forces in, and again, they have all the same things that Israel has. They have tanks, they have armored personnel carriers, they had jets, and actually the Ukrainian side didn't have all those things. They didn't have any air power, and Russia did, and Russia had air defense capability. Still, they had to go block by block. And because of these high-rise buildings, you can get the Hamas side in there, and I think it's a pretty good chance that they have anti-tank weapons, that they have what's called RPG, rocket launch or grenade launchers, basically. They certainly have high-powered rifles and sniper rifles, and they will get in different parts of the city, in high rises on different floors, where they have crossfire into different areas where the Israelis might not even be able to see them. And to get them out, you either have to destroy the building, which Russians did, or you have to go in floor by floor, not just building by building, but floor by floor and room by room. And that is incredibly costly in personnel. Forget about the equipment, but the personnel to go through that, because it is very clear, at least up to this point, that Hamas is completely committed to what they're doing. And before this, the estimate was that Hamas had about 30,000 fighters. But the problem for Israel, compounded, is when they go in there, the real question is, how do they know who the enemy is? Now, in the Russia-Ukraine war, it was obvious. They have different uniforms on. So you go after the guy in the uniform. And almost all the citizens were gone out of Bakhmut. Here, almost nobody's gone because where can they go? The Gaza Strip is sealed off. And how can you just tell if this is a Hamas fighter, or is it just some father rushing around trying to take care of his family? Or is it just somebody who's caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Unless Israel is ready to go in there and literally kill everyone, the ability to identify the enemy from innocent people is almost impossible. We had this same problem in Iraq and Afghanistan during our occupations there. It was so hard, especially on the Taliban, to be able to even identify who the enemy was, because he could be a farmer right now. I saw this myself in some of the operations that I went on. We saw what we thought were Taliban members out in a certain field, but we didn't know. I mean, they could have actually been farmers, or they could have been farming it by day and then Taliban by night, and that happened too. But we had no idea, and our rules of engagement didn't allow us to just kill everybody, because then we could inadvertently be killing the people we're trying to protect. Israel will have that same problem magnified 10 times more, not only because the cities are much, much larger and much more dense, but because the civil population can't get out of the way. So that's one thing that the Israeli civilian government is going to have to do, is lay down some pretty strict rules of engagement, or they could end up killing so many people and maybe not even get the Hamas, enough of them to actually dismantle the organization. That's Netanyahu's stated goal, is to dismantle the organization. And it's very eerily similar to what President Obama said in December 2009 before he surged American troops in there to eradicate the Taliban. And as we know how that worked out, it didn't work out. And the problem, more compounded for Israel, that you need to understand, is that let's just say that number was right, and there's 30,000 Hamas fighters. When Israel comes in there and they're not distinguishing Hamas from just any male person, Palestinian man that they see there, and they start shooting everybody, all of a sudden the male population will realize, and the whole population for that matter, that there is no point in not fighting back. Now all of a sudden everyone will be fighting the Israeli, because they're destroying them and they're simply going to be defending what they have. Israel has to take that into consideration before they launch one troop in there, because if they go into a beehive and all of a sudden there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people ready to take up arms against Israel, against the IDF, then what is right now a big problem could turn into catastrophe, because this just can go so many ways negative. And always there's the problem and the risk, which has also been talked about, that if Israel goes into this, and especially if they start getting bogged down, the risk of an incursion from Hezbollah or other Islamic groups from the north starts to rise, or coming in from any other direction. So there's lots of risk here, and the Israeli government has to really think long and hard on this, and they can't get pushed ahead because of emotion, and rush in to take care of something because their emotions are so raw from the horrible, evil, vicious things that have been done to their population. Israel is right in defending itself. They have the absolute right to get justice for what has been done to their people. But the task to do that and the ways to do that could go so wrong and cause them more harm if they don't do it right. And that is why it's important for them to understand the full scale and the full scope of what they're up against right now, so they don't make it worse. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. And as always, we ask you to like and subscribe and share this to other people, because a lot of people don't know about this kind of information, and let your friends know about what we're doing here. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.